we don't get our money back. We get nothing. So we're getting our money back. We're going to get our money back because it's not fair. It's just not fair. And we will see. But I think we're pretty close to a deal, and we better be close to a deal, because that has been a horrible situation. It would have never happened if I were president.
Ukraine is reportedly home to Europe's largest reserves of titanium used to make alloys for aircraft and naval vessels, as well as lithium, a critical material in batteries. Trump wants 50% of the revenue from resource extraction in Ukraine, plus the right of refusal to purchase any minerals exported before Ukraine can sell them to any other country. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent traveled to Ukraine last week to get Zelensky to agree to a deal, but Zelensky initially pushed back, sending Bessent home with no deal. The negotiations have resumed, but not before a war of words broke out between President Trump and Zelensky, with the Ukrainian leader telling reporters President Trump was living in a, quote, Russian disinformation space, triggering President Trump, who then called Zelensky a dictator with no elections on Truth Social. All of this as President Trump presses forward to even the playing field with trade partners, threatening tariffs to come this April as he seeks to end two wars, cut the size of government, and expand America's footprint, with potentially acquiring part or all of the Panama Canal very soon as well. Joining me now, the man at the center of it all in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary, good to see you today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning, Maria. Always good to see you.
Can you walk us through the negotiations that you are having right now to tap into not just these rare earth minerals, but also oil in Ukraine? What can you tell us? Where does the deal stand?
So, Maria, as you said earlier, I traveled to Kyiv about 10 days ago and met with President Zelensky. And this deal is part of President Trump's long arc negotiating strategy for peace between Ukraine and Russia, and to let the Ukrainians get back to a peaceful existence. So the first part of this is a partnership between Ukraine and the U.S. that involves strategic minerals, energy, and state-owned enterprises, where we set up a partnership, and we are only looking forward. It is a win-win. President Trump created this idea himself. It is a win-win. We make money if the Ukrainian people make money, and I believe that with the United States of America, our know-how, our businesses willing to come in and provide capital, that we can accelerate the Ukrainian growth trajectory and take in substantial monies for the U.S. taxpayers and get the Ukrainian economy on a great growth trajectory.
Does this deal include security, helping to secure Ukraine, and do you expect Zelensky to sign it?
I do expect that President Zelensky will sign. What it does not include is a military guarantee. But what it does include is an implicit guarantee that if the United States of America is heavily invested in the economic future, I call it an economic security guarantee. The more assets that U.S. companies have on the ground, the bigger interest that the U.S. has in the future of Ukrainian economy doing well, the more security it creates for the Ukrainian people, and the higher the return for the U.S. taxpayer. Again, President Trump has structured this win-win deal, and it's unfortunate that after my meeting with President Zelensky and then his meeting in Munich with Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, the idea here of my trip to Ukraine and then the meeting in Munich, we want to intertwine the U.S. and Ukrainian economies for the benefit of both. And unfortunately, President Zelensky seems to have put a bit of daylight between us, but I am sure in the long run, or in the short run, there is no daylight. The deal will be signed, and this will give President Trump a lever, and it will be a strong signal to Russian leadership that the U.S. is in a serious partnership with the Ukrainian people.
President Zelensky is speaking right now, saying today that he was willing to give up his position if it meant peace in Ukraine, quipping that he could exchange his departure for Ukraine's entry into NATO. Zelensky also says he wanted to see Donald Trump as a partner to Ukraine and more than simply a mediator between Kyiv and Moscow. I want it to be more than just mediation. That's not enough, he told a press conference just moments ago. Your reaction? Is this also suggesting that there could be a change in leadership in Ukraine?
Maria, I try to stay in my economics and finance lane. So this is the first that I've heard about it. But at some point, Ukrainian people, it's a democracy, they're going to have an election, and they will democratically elect a leader. President Zelensky has been a wartime president, and we've seen in the history of this, Winston Churchill was a fantastic wartime leader, and then the British people decided to move on after he'd done a great job during World War II.
Secretary, I know that the Prime Minister of the UK will be at the White House Thursday, and the President is meeting with French President Macron on Monday to discuss their ideas for a resolution to this war. And one of the ideas, according to the Wall Street Journal, is that the U.S. would have a backstop in terms of potential military. Has the President considered this?
Maria, my understanding, and again, I try to stay in the econ and finance lane, but my understanding here is that it will be a European military solution, not a NATO solution, and that we will go from there. So I believe that is why Prime Minister Stammer, the President Macron are in town. And then, I believe what we can do is fortify the existing boundaries of NATO. We could have Fortress Baltics, Fortress Poland, without the U.S. having any involvement on the ground in Ukraine going forward.
Well, this is very exciting, Secretary, what you're working on in terms of this deal in Ukraine. Do you expect a deal to be announced this week in terms of those rare earth minerals and energy?
I'm quite hopeful, Maria. And the other thing I would say here, too, is common to a lot of misperceptions is the Russians hate this deal. That the morning that I arrived in Ukraine, to get into Kyiv, you fly to Poland, you take a 10-hour night train in. The Russians unfortunately bombed Kyiv. It was a missile barrage 4 hours before I got there. It was the first time that such a barrage had taken place since November. So I think that was a strong signal from Russian leadership that they don't like this deal because it gives President Trump more negotiating leverage. So if the Russians don't like it, my view is Ukrainians should.
Well, let me move on to tariffs, sir, because you have been tasked, you and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, have been tasked with studying the impact of reciprocal tariffs, and you're supposed to be giving the president a report at the end of March. Are tariffs coming, reciprocal tariffs, and how expansive might they be? We've talked in the past, it doesn't just include trade, but it could cover currency manipulation, digital fees that Europe puts on our companies, the VAT tax that the Europeans charge, as well as, lawsuits on technology companies of American origin.
Yes, so Maria, Commerce and USTR are going to produce a report on April 1st, and we're going to take a look at, you just did an excellent job. We're going to look at the actual tariffs, non-tariff barriers, underlying the currency manipulation, and then whether there are any other factors, sort of as China does with unfair financing of their corporates. And a fifth portion has come to our attention with these lawsuits that the EU launches against our great tech companies. So we're going to take that in the aggregate, and I can't tell you what's going to happen because it's path dependent. The nature of reciprocal tariffs is that if we start matching, whether it's the EU, that any other country in the world with reciprocal tariffs, we're just doing what they're doing and then adding in these other factors. If they remediate those, which is path dependent on their reaction function, if they do that, then their tariffs could drop. if they want to be recalcitrant, if they want to continue these unfair trade practices, then the tariff wall will go up until they are willing to negotiate.
So there's a tariff law from the 1930s that allows a president to charge up to 50% tariff. Has President Trump talked about that kind of tariff on Europe, given the VAT tax, as well as all of these other issues we just mentioned?
Yeah, I think we should wait till April 1st and see what it is. President Trump understands leverage better than anyone, so I'm not going to jump in front of him, and I'm sure that he is willing to do whatever it takes to get the free but fair trade for the American people.
Secretary, as we wrap up, I've got to point out this Lindsay report. The Lindsay Group came out with a report, Can DOGE Induce a Recession? As we see so many government jobs getting cut right now, do you worry that that cuts into the job creation numbers and the overall macro story? As you also recently reached, the country has reached its statutory debt limit, prompting the Treasury to implement extraordinary measures to prevent default. You're dealing with so much, and DOGE is cutting jobs. Does that cut into growth?
Look, Maria, I think that if we have a bloated government, and if that gets cut down, then government spending will go down. Many times on your show in the past 10 months, I've talked about reprivatizing the economy, and that's what we're going to have to do. We've seen what I would call this orgiastic government spending with the past administration. We're running 6.7, 6.9% deficit to GDP, which we've never had when we're not in a recession, not in a war, and we're going to bring that down. And so as the government employment comes down, private sector will not be crowded out anymore. All the jobs created by the Biden, not all, but the 70, 85% of the jobs created by the Biden administration were government jobs, government adjacent. They crowded out the private sector. The government interest rates spiked. I would just point out, interest rates are down 5 weeks in a row on the 10-year since President Trump took office. And mortgage rates are down. We're going to get that down. I was sitting next to, I noticed you're going to have Governor Youngkin later. I was sitting next to him on Friday, and I said, Governor, how do you feel about these layoffs in Northern Virginia? And he said, Scott, I think he told me there's something like 350,000 private sector job openings in Virginia. The state of Virginia has a portal. So